Marcus Thornfield adjusted his Italian silk tie as his Mercedes pulled up to the curb outside the downtown Ritz-Carlton. At 42, he had built an empire from nothing: tech ventures, real estate, strategic investments that had multiplied his wealth beyond measure. His driver opened the door, and Marcus stepped onto the sidewalk, his hand-stitched Oxford shoes clicking against the pavement. The autumn air carried a chill, and he pulled his cashmere coat tighter, already mentally reviewing the acquisition meeting that awaited him upstairs. That's when he saw her. Huddled against the building's limestone facade, wrapped in layers of tattered fabric, sat a woman with a cardboard sign. Her head was bowed, face obscured by a wool cap pulled low, and her hands, raw and trembling, clutched a paper cup containing a few coins. Marcus felt an unfamiliar tug in his chest, something he hadn't experienced in years. The business world had hardened him, taught him to look past the suffering that decorated city streets like forgotten decorations. But something about this woman made him pause. He reached into his pocket, pulled out his money clip, and extracted a $100 bill. As he approached, she looked up, and their eyes met. Marcus froze mid-step. Those eyes, ocean blue with flecks of gold, struck him with the force of recognition, though he couldn't place from where. They were eyes that had once held light, now dulled by hardship, but still containing an unmistakable intelligence. The woman's gaze held his for only a moment before she looked away, shame coloring her weathered cheeks. "Here," Marcus said, his voice softer than he intended, placing the bill in her cup. She nodded without speaking, and he noticed her hands. Despite their condition, they had long, elegant fingers. The kind of hands that had once known better days. As he walked toward the hotel entrance, Marcus couldn't shake the feeling that this encounter meant something, though he dismissed it as sentimentality. He had a business empire to run, deals to close, money to make. The woman on the street was just another face in the city's endless parade of misfortune. Yet as he rode the elevator to the 50th floor, Marcus found himself unable to focus on the briefing documents his assistant had prepared. Instead, he kept seeing those blue eyes, kept feeling that strange pull of recognition. Who was she? Why did she seem familiar? He stood at the floor-to-ceiling windows of the conference room, gazing down at the street below, searching for the small figure against the building. From this height, she was barely visible, just another shadow in the urban landscape. But Marcus knew she was there, and for reasons he couldn't explain, that knowledge unsettled him more than any business deal ever had. The acquisition meeting dragged on for 3 hours, but Marcus barely registered the presentations, the financial projections, or the carefully rehearsed pitches from the selling company's executives. His chief financial officer, David Chun, had to repeat questions twice, and his vice president of operations shot him concerned glances across the mahogany table. This wasn't like Marcus Thornfield, the man known for his laser focus, his ability to spot weaknesses in any business proposal, his reputation for never missing a detail that could affect the bottom line. "Marcus, are you all right?" David asked during a break, his tone careful. They'd worked together for 15 years, and David knew when something was off. "You seem distracted." "Fine," Marcus replied curtly, then softened his tone. "Just something on my mind. Continue with the due diligence. I trust your judgment on this one." David nodded, though his expression remained skeptical. Marcus excused himself and walked to the window again, phone in hand. He pretended to check emails while his mind wandered back to the woman on the street. That face, those eyes. Where had he seen them before? Then, like a key turning in a long-locked door, a memory surfaced. 20 years ago, Harvard Business School. A young woman in his economics seminar who had challenged every assumption he made, who had debated him with fierce intelligence and backed up her arguments with meticulous research. What was her name? The memory felt like trying to grasp smoke, present but intangible. Elizabeth? No, Eleanor. Eleanor Whitmore. She had been brilliant, passionate about social entrepreneurship and ethical business practices. He remembered how her eyes would light up when she talked about using business as a force for good, about creating companies that valued people over profits. Marcus felt his heart rate quicken. Could it be? No, impossible. Eleanor Whitmore had graduated second in their class. She'd had job offers from every major consulting firm and investment bank. The last he'd heard, admittedly 2 decades ago, she'd started some kind of nonprofit focused on microfinance in developing countries. There was no conceivable path from that trajectory to begging on a street corner. Yet those eyes, that face beneath the grime and hardship, the more he thought about it, the more certain he became. The bone structure, the shape of her chin, even the way she'd looked away in shame was familiar. Eleanor had always been proud, almost to a fault. He pulled out his phone and opened a search engine, typing in her name. The results were sparse and troubling. A few outdated articles about her nonprofit from 15 years ago, then nothing. Her LinkedIn profile was deactivated. No social media presence. It was as if Eleanor Whitmore had simply vanished from the digital world, which in today's interconnected age meant something had gone terribly wrong. Marcus felt a weight settle in his stomach. Guilt, perhaps, for not keeping in touch, for being so absorbed in building his empire that he'd lost track of someone who had once mattered. Or maybe it was something else, something he wasn't ready to name. Marcus couldn't return to the meeting. He told David to handle the rest and found himself riding the elevator back down to street level, his heart pounding with an urgency he hadn't felt since his first startup's make-or-break investor pitch. The lobby seemed to stretch endlessly before him, marble floors gleaming under crystal chandeliers, a world of luxury that suddenly felt obscene. He pushed through the revolving doors and turned left, walking quickly to where he'd seen the woman. She was gone. The spot where she'd been sitting was empty except for a crushed paper cup rolling in the wind. Marcus stood there, feeling foolish and frustrated. What had he expected? That she would wait for him? That he could swoop in like some kind of savior and fix whatever had broken in her life? He didn't even know for certain it was Eleanor. Maybe his mind had created connections where none existed, seen familiarity in a stranger's face because his conscience needed a project, a redemption story to offset the ruthlessness of his business dealings. "You looking for the lady who was here?" a voice asked. Marcus turned to see a doorman from the hotel, a middle-aged man with kind eyes and a weathered face. "She left about 20 minutes ago. Headed toward Union Station, I think." "Do you know her? Does she come here often?" Marcus asked, hearing the desperation in his own voice. The doorman shrugged. "Last few weeks, yeah. Always polite, never aggressive like some of them. Just sits there quiet like. Someone said she used to be somebody, you know? You can tell sometimes. The way she holds herself, even in those rags. Got a dignity about her." He paused, studying Marcus. "You know her?" "I might," Marcus admitted. 20 years ago, maybe. I'm not sure." He thanked the doorman and began walking toward Union Station, his expensive shoes carrying him through streets he normally drove past without a second glance. The sidewalks were crowded with the evening rush. Office workers heading home, tourists consulting phones, street vendors packing up their carts. Marcus wove through them all, scanning faces, looking for that particular combination of features that had triggered his memory. Union Station's Beaux-Arts facade loomed before him, its grand arches and soaring ceilings a monument to a different era. Inside, the main hall echoed with announcements and footsteps, and Marcus realized the futility of his search. Dozens of homeless people sought shelter here, tucked into corners, sprawled on benches, invisible to the commuters who streamed past. He spent an hour searching, drawing suspicious looks from security guards before finally admitting defeat. If it was Eleanor Whitmore, she had disappeared into the city's vast population of forgotten people, and he had no way to find her in this maze of humanity and indifference. Marcus returned to his penthouse apartment overlooking the harbor as twilight painted the sky in shades of amber and purple. His home was a testament to success: floor-to-ceiling windows, custom furniture, original artwork worth more than most people earned in a lifetime. Yet as he stood in his living room, drink in hand, the space felt empty and sterile, more like a showroom than a home. His housekeeper had left dinner in the warmer, but Marcus had no appetite. Instead, he walked to his study and opened the closet where he kept boxes of old memories, things he'd never quite been able to throw away despite his forward-focused philosophy. It took 20 minutes of searching, but he finally found what he was looking for, an old photo album from his Harvard days. The leather was cracked, the pages yellowed, but the photographs remained clear. There she was, Eleanor Whitmore, at a study group session. She wore jeans and a simple sweater, her hair pulled back in a ponytail, laughing at something someone had said. The intelligence in her eyes was unmistakable, as was the warmth. Marcus found himself staring at the photograph, comparing it to the haunted face he'd seen on the street. Could 20 years and hard circumstances transform someone so completely? He turned the pages, finding more pictures. Eleanor at a case competition, her team celebrating a win. Eleanor at someone's birthday party, animated in conversation. And then, a photo he'd forgotten about. The two of them together at graduation, both in caps and gowns, arms around each other's shoulders. They'd been friendly competitors, occasionally study partners, and once, after too many drinks at a bar exam celebration, almost something more. But Marcus had been too focused on his career trajectory, too ambitious to let anything distract him from his goals. Eleanor had been the same, equally driven but in a different direction. She wanted to change the world through social impact. He wanted to conquer it through market dominance. Marcus set the album aside and opened his laptop, diving deeper into his research. He found an article from 12 years ago in a trade publication about Eleanor's microfinance nonprofit, Global Opportunity Fund. The organization had provided small loans to women entrepreneurs in Southeast Asia and Africa, helping thousands start businesses and lift their families out of poverty. Eleanor had been featured in several impact investing conferences, praised as an innovator in sustainable development. But then, around 8 years ago, the trail went cold. The nonprofit's website had gone dark, and mentions of Eleanor Whitmore stopped appearing in publications and conference rosters. What happened? Marcus wondered, his fingers flying across the keyboard, searching deeper. He found a brief mention in a business journal from 7 years ago, a lawsuit, something about fraud allegations and mismanagement of donor funds. Marcus leaned closer to the screen, reading carefully. The article was vague, mentioning an investigation but no clear resolution. There were hints of a financial scandal involving Eleanor's co-founder and CFO, a man named Richard Castellano, but Eleanor's name was mentioned as being under investigation as well. After that, nothing. It was as if she had simply ceased to exist in any official capacity. Marcus sat back, understanding beginning to dawn. A scandal, even if she was innocent, could destroy everything: reputation, career, relationships, financial stability. If Eleanor had been caught up in someone else's crimes, if she'd been blamed or simply associated with wrongdoing, the nonprofit world would have closed its doors to her. Donors would have fled. Job opportunities would have evaporated. And Eleanor, proud Eleanor, would have been too. Ashamed to reach out to old connections, too humiliated to ask for help. Marcus felt a surge of anger at Richard Castellano, at the circumstances, and at himself for not knowing, for not being there when someone he'd once cared about had fallen. Marcus barely slept that night. He stood at his windows watching the city lights reflect off the dark water, thinking about the strange paths life could take. At 42, he had everything: wealth, power, respect, influence. At what must be around 42 as well, Eleanor Whitmore apparently had nothing, not even a place to sleep. The injustice of it gnawed at him, but more than that, he felt a personal responsibility. They'd come from the same place, started with the same advantages, and their paths had diverged so drastically. Could he have prevented this if he'd stayed in touch? Would she have accepted help from him? At dawn, Marcus was already dressed and in his car, heading back downtown. He'd made a decision during the sleepless night. He would find Eleanor Whitmore, confirm it was her, and then, well, he'd figure out the rest. His assistant, Jennifer, had called twice already, reminding him of a breakfast meeting with potential investors, but Marcus canceled it. For the first time in his career, something mattered more than business. He parked near Union Station and began walking the streets methodically, checking the spots where homeless people typically gathered: doorways, park benches, under overpasses. "You looking for someone specific?" a man asked. He sat against a building, a dog curled up beside him, and he watched Marcus with sharp, assessing eyes. "You've been walking these streets for an hour, and you ain't from around here. I can tell." Marcus hesitated, then decided honesty was the best approach. "A woman. She was begging near the Ritz-Carlton yesterday. Older, maybe early 40s, blue eyes, wearing layers of dark clothing and a wool cap." He pulled out his phone, showing the man the old photograph of Eleanor from Harvard. "She might look something like this 20 years ago." The man studied the photo, then nodded slowly. "Might know who you mean. Goes by Ellie. Keeps to herself mostly, doesn't cause trouble. Showed up maybe 2 months ago. Smart one, that lady. Educated, you can tell by how she talks. Some of us tried to get her to go to the shelter, but she won't. Too proud, I guess." He paused, considering Marcus. "You family?" "Old friend," Marcus said. "I want to help, if she'll let me." "Well, you might try Morrison Park, down by the waterfront. She goes there sometimes during the day, sits on this particular bench, facing the water. Says she used to go there when times were good, likes to remember." The man gave Marcus directions, then added, "Be gentle with her, mister. Whatever put her on these streets, it broke something inside. She's fragile, even if she doesn't show it." Marcus thanked him and headed toward the park, his heart pounding. Morrison Park was a small urban green space, popular with office workers during lunch breaks, but quieter in the early morning. He found the bench the man had described, overlooking the water, where boats were beginning to move through the harbor. And there she was, sitting at the far end of the bench, staring out at the sunrise. Even from behind, he recognized her posture, straight back despite everything, maintaining that dignity the doorman had mentioned. He approached slowly, not wanting to startle her. "Eleanor," he said softly. "Eleanor Whitmore?" She went rigid, her shoulders tensing, but she didn't turn around. Several seconds passed in silence, and Marcus wondered if he'd made a mistake, if this wasn't her after all. Then, in a voice rough from disuse and weather, but unmistakably the voice he remembered, she spoke. "Nobody's called me that in years. Everyone just calls me Ellie now, if they call me anything at all." She turned slowly, and Marcus saw her face clearly in the morning light. It was Eleanor, no doubt, but transformed by hardship. Her cheeks were hollow, her skin weathered, her hair, once lustrous and dark, now streaked with premature gray and roughly cut. But those eyes, those remarkable eyes, were the same. "Marcus Thornfield," she said, and something like a smile ghosted across her face. "Still wearing expensive suits, I see. Still conquering the world." Marcus sat down on the bench, maintaining a respectful distance. Up close, he could see how thin Eleanor was, how the layers of clothing hung on her frame. Her hands trembled slightly even in the mild morning air. The transformation from the vibrant, confident woman he'd known to this weathered, broken person was shocking, but he forced himself to hide his reaction. The last thing she needed was his pity. "I've done well," he admitted. "But Eleanor, what happened? How did you end up here?" She laughed, but there was no humor in it, only bitterness. "That's a long story, Marcus. One I'm not sure I want to tell, and one I'm certain you don't want to hear. You're probably late for some important meeting, some deal that needs closing. I remember how you were always racing toward the next achievement, the next milestone." She pulled her coat tighter, even though the morning wasn't particularly cold. "Thank you for the $100 yesterday, by the way. That was kind. More than most people manage." "I have all the time in the world," Marcus said, and he meant it. "Tell me, Eleanor. Please. What happened to Global Opportunity Fund? To your career? To you?" She was quiet for so long that Marcus thought she wouldn't answer. She stared out at the water, watching a sailboat glide past, its white sails catching the morning light. When she finally spoke, her voice was distant, as if she were recounting someone else's story. "I built something beautiful, Marcus. For 10 years, Global Opportunity Fund changed lives. We helped over 50,000 women start businesses, put food on their tables, send their children to school. I traveled the world, saw the direct impact of our work, met incredible people who just needed a chance. She paused, swallowing hard. But I made a mistake. I trusted the wrong person. Richard Castellano, my co-founder and CFO. He seemed perfect for the role, had all the right credentials, said all the right things about wanting to make a difference. I was focused on the program side, on expanding our reach, and I let him handle the finances. I believed him when he showed me reports, when he told me about investment returns, when he explained how our endowment was growing. I didn't dig deeper. I didn't verify. I trusted. Marcus felt a chill that had nothing to do with the temperature. What did he do? He was running a Ponzi scheme, essentially. Taking new donor money to pay returns to early investors, making it look like our investment portfolio was performing brilliantly, which helped us raise even more money. Meanwhile, he was siphoning off millions into offshore accounts. By the time I discovered it, by the time the auditors discovered it, the whole thing collapsed. $70 million gone. Donors destroyed financially. Our programs shut down. Thousands of women who depended on our loans suddenly cut off. Eleanor's hands clenched into fists. And I was the face of the organization. I was the one who'd stood on stages and promised responsible stewardship of donor funds. When it all fell apart, Richard disappeared, literally fled the country to somewhere without extradition treaties, and I was left to face the consequences. The criminal investigation cleared me eventually. They found that I'd been ignorant, not complicit. But ignorance isn't much of a defense when you're supposed to be a leader, when people trusted you with their money and their dreams. Eleanor continued, her voice growing softer, as if the weight of the memories was pressing down on her. The civil lawsuits were different. Even though I wasn't charged criminally, donors sued me personally. They argued that as CEO and co-founder, I should have known, should have caught it, should have protected their investments. Some of them had put their entire savings into our fund, believing in the mission, believing in me. One woman, I'll never forget her, had liquidated her retirement account to invest in what Richard told her was a guaranteed social impact portfolio. She lost everything. Marcus watched as Eleanor wiped at her eyes with the back of her hand, the gesture leaving a streak of dirt across her cheek. I didn't have millions in personal assets, but I had something. A house, savings, the remnants of an inheritance from my parents. The lawyers took it all in settlements. I gave it willingly, actually. How could I not? These people had trusted me. But it wasn't enough. It could never be enough to make them whole. The professional destruction came next, she continued. I was blacklisted in the nonprofit sector. No board would have me, no organization would hire me, not even in entry-level positions. My name had become synonymous with the scandal, even though I'd been a victim too. I tried to rebrand, to use my middle name, to apply for jobs outside the nonprofit world, but in today's digital age, Google searches reveal everything. HR departments would get to the final stages of hiring, do their background checks, and then suddenly the offers would disappear. Marcus felt anger building inside him, not at Eleanor, but at the cascade of circumstances that had destroyed her. What about friends? Family? Surely someone could have helped you. My parents were gone, died in a car accident my second year at Harvard, remember? I was an only child. As for friends, Eleanor laughed bitterly. It's amazing how quickly people disappear when scandal touches you. Colleagues I'd worked with for years stopped returning calls. Friends I'd traveled with, celebrated with, suddenly couldn't meet for coffee. I think they were afraid the stain would spread to them, that their reputations would be damaged by association. Or maybe they just didn't know what to say. How do you comfort someone who's lost everything? I could have reached out. Eleanor turned to look at him directly for the first time, and Marcus saw the flash of pride that still existed beneath the brokenness. Marcus, we hadn't spoken in 18 years. We moved in completely different circles. You were building your empire in tech and finance, and I was in the nonprofit world. Our paths never crossed. And honestly, even if they had, would you have wanted to be associated with me after the scandal? Your reputation is everything in business. I wouldn't have dragged you into it. Marcus wanted to protest, to insist that he would have helped, but he wasn't entirely certain that was true. 8 years ago, he'd been ruthlessly focused on growth, on success, on maintaining his image as a brilliant investor and business leader. Would he have risked that reputation to help an old acquaintance caught up in scandal? He wanted to believe he would have, but Eleanor's skepticism made him wonder about the man he'd been, the man he might still be. "Tell me the rest," he said quietly. "How did you go from legal troubles to this?" Eleanor stood up from the bench, wrapping her arms around herself. Marcus noticed she wore at least 3 or 4 layers of clothing, a survival technique he'd read about, wearing everything you own to prevent theft. She walked a few steps toward the water's edge and Marcus followed, giving her space to speak at her own pace. The harbor was coming alive now, ferries loading passengers, joggers passing by, the city waking up to another day of commerce and routine. The descent was gradual, then sudden, Eleanor said. "For about 2 years after the scandal, I managed to stay afloat. I'd sold everything. My house, my car, my furniture, my mother's jewelry. I rented a tiny studio apartment and lived on the proceeds while searching for work. Any work. I applied for administrative positions, retail jobs, food service, anything that would bring an income. But I was overqualified for entry-level positions, and no one wanted to hire someone with my background for anything substantial. I was stuck in this terrible limbo." She paused to watch a ferry pull away from the dock. "I worked odd jobs under the table, cleaning houses, doing data entry for small businesses that didn't ask many questions, tutoring high school students whose parents paid cash. It was humiliating, but I survived. I told myself it was temporary, that eventually people would forget, that I'd find my footing again. I was wrong." "What changed?" Marcus asked. "I got sick. Nothing dramatic, pneumonia, basically, but I didn't have health insurance anymore. I tried to tough it out, couldn't afford to miss the few work opportunities one had. It got worse. By the time I went to the emergency room, I had a serious infection. They saved my life, but the medical bills were catastrophic. $60,000. I had no way to pay, obviously. The hospital tried to work with me on a payment plan, but I couldn't even make the minimum payments." Eleanor's voice was flat now, reciting facts without emotion, as if she were talking about someone else's life. "The landlord evicted me when I couldn't pay rent for 3 months. I'd been choosing between rent and medical bill payments, trying to juggle both, failing at both. I spent a few nights in my car, the one thing I'd bought again when I thought I was getting back on my feet, but then that broke down and I couldn't afford repairs. I slept in the car for 2 weeks where it died, on a side street, until parking enforcement had it towed. Everything I owned was in that car." Marcus felt physically ill listening to this. "Why didn't you go to a shelter?" "I tried. The shelters in this city are full, Marcus. There are waiting lists, lotteries. You have to line up at 4 in the afternoon to maybe get a bed for the night, and even then, there's no guarantee. The first few times I tried, I didn't get in. And the shelters that did have space." She shuddered. "They can be dangerous places, especially for women. Things get stolen. People get assaulted. I chose the streets instead, found doorways and underpasses, places where I could keep my few possessions safe and relatively secure. The first month was the worst. I kept thinking someone would recognize me, would help, but I'd become invisible. People look through you when you're homeless. They see the dirt and the old clothes, but they don't see the person underneath. I'd stand on street corners holding signs, and people I'd once known, colleagues from conferences, donors I'd met at events, would walk right past me without a flicker of recognition. I was a ghost of my former self, literally and figuratively." Marcus couldn't listen anymore without acting. "Come with me," he said, his voice firm. "Right now. We're getting you off the street, getting you medical care, getting you back on your feet." Eleanor shook her head, and Marcus saw the fear in her eyes. "Marcus, I appreciate the impulse, I really do. But you can't just swoop in and fix this. I'm not a business problem you can solve with money and resources. I'm a human being who's been broken by circumstances, by my own failures, by a system that discards people who stumble. You can't understand what it's like to fall this far unless you've lived it." "Then help me understand," Marcus insisted. "But do it somewhere warm, somewhere safe, over a hot meal. Please, Eleanor. Let me at least do that much. You can walk away afterward if you want, but give me a few hours. We were friends once. Honor that friendship for a morning. She studied his face, searching for something, sincerity, perhaps, or ulterior motives. Whatever she saw must have satisfied her because she nodded slowly. A few hours. But Marcus, I need you to understand something. I've accepted my situation. I've made peace with it. I'm not looking for rescue, and I'm not going to be your charity project, your redemption story to make yourself feel better about your wealth and success. Fair enough, Marcus said, though privately, he had no intention of letting her return to the streets after a single meal. They walked to his car, and he saw Eleanor hesitate before getting in, as if the luxury vehicle represented a world she no longer belonged to. During the drive to his penthouse, she sat rigidly in the passenger seat, staring out the window at the city passing by. Marcus made several attempts at conversation, but she responded only in monosyllables, clearly uncomfortable with the situation. At his building, the doorman's professional mask slipped for just a moment when he saw Eleanor's appearance, but he recovered quickly and greeted them both politely. In the elevator, Marcus watched Eleanor's reflection in the polished brass. She looked small and out of place, her weathered face and worn clothing jarring against the elevator's opulence. But beneath the dirt and damage, he could still see traces of the woman she'd been, the brilliant, passionate student who challenged him to think beyond profit margins. When they entered his penthouse, Eleanor stopped just inside the door, taking in the space with an expression Marcus couldn't read. "You've done very well for yourself," she said finally. "This is what? 10,000 square feet? Harbor view, custom, everything. Must be worth, what, 20 million? 18, Marcus said, then felt foolish for correcting her. "Look, why don't you take a shower? There's a guest suite through that door, and I'll have some clothes sewn up. My assistant is roughly your size. Then we'll have breakfast and talk. Really talk." Eleanor looked at him for a long moment, then nodded. "A shower sounds like heaven," she admitted. "I haven't had a proper hot shower in, God, months. The public facilities are always cold or broken." She walked toward the guest suite, then paused. "Marcus? Thank you. I know I'm being defensive and difficult. Old pride dying hard, I guess. But thank you for seeing me, for remembering me, for caring enough to look." After she disappeared into the guest suite, Marcus immediately called his assistant. "Jennifer, I need you to buy a complete outfit for a woman, pants, shirt, undergarments, shoes, jacket. Size 8 or 10, I'd guess. And make it nice but not ostentatious. Also, contact Dr. Reeves. Tell him I'm bringing someone in this afternoon for a complete physical. Tell him it's urgent." An hour later, Eleanor emerged from the guest suite transformed. Jennifer's clothing choices had been perfect: dark jeans, a soft cashmere sweater, a wool blazer. Eleanor's hair was wet and combed back, her face clean, revealing bone structure that was still elegant despite her gauntness. She looked like a businesswoman again, or at least like someone who could be one. But her eyes still carried that haunted quality, the weight of experiences that fine clothes couldn't erase. Marcus had ordered breakfast from his favorite restaurant: eggs Benedict, fresh fruit, pastries, juice, coffee. He watched as Eleanor sat down at his dining table, her hands hovering over the silverware as if she'd forgotten how to use it properly. Then she picked up the fork and knife and began eating slowly, methodically, forcing herself not to rush despite obvious hunger. It broke his heart to watch her careful dignity, her determination not to appear desperate. "I've been thinking," Marcus said as they ate, "about what you said about not wanting to be a charity project. I respect that. But I have a proposition for you, a business proposition." Eleanor looked up, skepticism clear in her expression. "My company has grown to the point where I've been considering establishing a foundation, something focused on social impact investing, supporting entrepreneurs in underserved communities, exactly the kind of work you excelled at with Global Opportunity Fund." "Marcus, let me finish," he said. "I need someone who understands the sector, who knows the pitfalls, who has the expertise to build something sustainable and ethical. Someone who's learned from mistakes and knows how to prevent them. That person is you, Eleanor. I want to offer you a job, not out of pity, but because you're genuinely the most qualified person I know for this role. You'd have full control over the foundation's strategy, significant resources, and a salary commensurate with the position's responsibilities. Eleanor set down her fork, her hands trembling. You can't be serious. I'm a liability, Marcus. My name is poison in this sector. Donors won't trust a foundation associated with me. You'd be risking your reputation. Let me worry about my reputation, Marcus said firmly. 8 years is a long time. People's memories fade, and more importantly, people value redemption stories. You were caught in someone else's crime, cleared of wrongdoing, and paid a terrible price anyway. That's not a scandal. That's an injustice. We can tell that story, use it to demonstrate our foundation's commitment to ethical practices and second chances. He pulled out his phone and opened a document he'd been drafting since dawn. I've outlined the basic structure. The Whitmore Thornfield Foundation for Social Enterprise. $50 million initial endowment, with a commitment to contribute an additional $10 million annually. You'd serve as executive director, reporting directly to me as board chair. Full transparency in all operations, quarterly audits, independent oversight board. We'd learn from what happened with GOF and build in protections against anything similar. Eleanor stared at him, tears beginning to stream down her clean face. Why are you doing this? After 20 years, after we'd lost touch completely, why do you care what happens to me? Marcus considered the question carefully. Because yesterday, I saw you on that street, and I realized something. I've spent 2 decades building wealth and power, but I've lost something essential along the way. The sense that business can be more than just accumulating zeros in a bank account. You reminded me of the person I wanted to be when we were students, before I got caught up in the game of acquisition and domination. This isn't charity, Eleanor. This is me asking you to save me from becoming completely hollow. He leaned forward, his voice intense. And honestly, because we were friends once, and friendship should mean something. It should mean showing up when someone needs help, even if 20 years have passed. Especially then. I can't undo what happened to you, can't restore what was taken, but I can offer you a chance to rebuild. Not your old life, something new, something better, something we create together. Eleanor covered her face with her hands, shoulders shaking. Marcus moved around the table and gently placed a hand on her shoulder. She looked up at him, and for the first time since he'd found her, he saw hope in those remarkable eyes. I don't know if I can do this, she whispered. I don't know if I'm strong enough to try again, to risk caring about something, to face the possibility of failing again. You're the strongest person I know, Marcus said simply. You survived hell and kept your dignity, your intelligence, your capacity to care. That takes more strength than building a business empire. Say yes, Eleanor. Say you'll take this chance. Not for me, for yourself, and for all those people who still need someone to believe in their potential. She was quiet for a long moment, then nodded slowly. Yes, she said, her voice barely audible. Yes, I'll try. Then, stronger. Yes, Marcus. Let's build something beautiful together. Something that matters. Something that might redeem us both. Marcus smiled, feeling something shift inside him, some long-frozen part of his heart beginning to thaw. Then let's start today. We have work to do, you and I. Important work. The kind that changes lives, including our own.